The roar of the grand ballroom suddenly faded when a strange sound echoed outside. Then it happened. A magnificent steam carriage came to a sharp halt before the palace steps. Its wheels hissed. Servants rushed to the entrance in confusion. Nobles near the windows gasped and turned. Inside the ballroom, whispers spread like fire. Whose carriage is that? No crest, no family colors. Who would dare interrupt the gala? Then the great doors burst open. Hundreds of heads turned at once. Glasses slipped from trembling hands and shattered across the marble floor. There, framed beneath the golden lights, stood the woman the Duke had been too ashamed to bring. Duchess Eleanor Ravenshire. Dressed in black silk and diamonds, eyes blazing with pain and power, she stepped inside like judgment itself. Every footstep struck the marble with calm authority. At the center of the ballroom, Duke Adrian still held the hand of the younger woman he had proudly chosen over his wife, but now his fingers slowly loosened. Color drained from his face. The mistress who had arrived smiling moments earlier was suddenly trembling. Whispers tore through the room. She came. She actually came. After what he did to her? Then Eleanor stopped before them both, reached into her glove, and drew out sealed papers that made bankers gasp and noblemen rise to their feet. The Duke staggered backwards, because in that instant he knew the wife he had humiliated in private was about to destroy him before all of London. But before we witness how one proud duke lost everything in a single night, please subscribe for more unforgettable royal dramas. Now let us return to the beginning, to the days when he called her the only light in England, before vanity poisoned his heart, before another woman entered his life, and before betrayal arrived dressed in silk. London, in the early years of Queen Victoria's reign, lived for rank, beauty, and spectacle. Carriages rolled through polished streets lined with gas lamps. Ladies glided through drawing rooms in silk, and every season brought fresh talk of fortunes, titles, and marriages. Among all the young noblemen of that glittering world, none drew more attention than Duke Adrian Ravenshire. He was tall, handsome, and carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who had never been denied anything. His family name was old, his townhouse in Mayfair grand, and his country estate spoken of with admiration. Mothers with unmarried daughters watched him closely whenever he entered a ballroom. It was expected that Adrian would marry a woman of dazzling beauty and great fortune. Instead, he chose Lady Eleanor Whitmore, daughter of a modest viscount whose family preferred country life to London display. She was not the loudest woman in a room, nor the most decorated, but when she spoke, people listened. She had calm gray eyes, gentle manners, and a quiet intelligence that made foolish people uneasy. She noticed servants by name, remembered small kindnesses, and never competed for attention. Many in society whispered that the Duke had made a sentimental mistake. Adrian seemed not to care. He adored her in a way that silenced mockery for a time. At dinners he pulled back her chair himself. At concerts he leaned close to explain the music. In Hyde Park they rode side by side in the mornings, laughing privately while others stared. Their wedding filled St. George's Church with flowers, polished silver, and guests eager to witness the season's most surprising match. London newspapers praised the romance. Even those who doubted Eleanor admitted the Duke looked happiest beside her. The first years of marriage were warm and busy. Ravenshire House, once formal and stiff, became lively. Fresh flowers appeared in every room. Music drifted from the blue drawing room in the evenings. Adrian returned home early more often than not. The long dining table, once used only for state dinners, now held family breakfasts of hot rolls, honey, eggs, smoked ham, and fruit brought in baskets from the country estate. Soon a son was born and named Henry. 2 years later came twin girls, Clara and Louisa, their nursery filled with toys, tiny shoes, and the soft sounds of children learning the world. Eleanor gave herself completely to motherhood, but the birth of the twins was long and dangerous. Fever followed. For weeks the house moved in whispers. Doctors came and went with grave faces. When she finally recovered, she was thinner in some places, fuller in others, often tired and marked by the ordeal in ways hidden beneath expensive gowns. She still carried grace, but society noticed change before courage. Some ladies who once envied her now spoke with sharpened pity. At the same time, Adrian's father died, and with the title came ledgers no one had shown him before. The estates were burdened with hidden deaths, unpaid loans, and costly repairs. The grandeur remained, but the money beneath it was weakening. Pressure settled over Adrian like damp winter fog. He smiled in public, but privately he grew restless. He began hearing every whisper he once ignored. At a dinner held in their own home, candlelight flickering over crystal glasses and roast pheasant, a guest remarked that motherhood had altered the Duchess more than expected. Another woman gave a quiet laugh. Across the table, Eleanor lowered her eyes. Adrian heard every word. He said nothing. Once careless with money because he had never needed to think of it, he now lived under the weight of unpaid accounts, failing rents, and letters sealed with demands. Yet instead of cutting costs or accepting help, he clung harder to display. New coats arrived from tailors in Bond Street. 2 expensive horses were added to the stable. Fresh silver was ordered for dinners no one could truly afford. He hosted evenings of wine, oysters, pheasant, and music, so London would continue believing Ravenshire remained untouchable. Eleanor saw the danger clearly. She spent quiet mornings at the writing desk, studying household ledgers, trimming waste where she could. She dismissed unnecessary flower orders, reduced imported delicacies, and sold a pair of emerald earrings gifted to her at marriage. She suggested delaying repairs to the orangery and letting unused town rooms remain closed through winter. Every idea was practical, calm, and meant to protect their future. Adrian received each suggestion as a wound. He told himself a husband who took guidance from his wife looked weak. When guests came, he increasingly asked Eleanor to rest upstairs. He said crowded rooms tired her since the twins. He claimed the children needed her more than society did. At first she believed him. Later she understood he preferred being seen alone. If she entered a drawing room unexpectedly, conversations would pause just long enough for her to feel it. Adrian would smile tightly and ask if she should not be lying down. Business matters grew worse. One afternoon, as his solicitor discussed overdue loans in the library, Eleanor quietly pointed out a duplicate charge in the papers. She had noticed it at once. Adrian snapped before the man could reply. He said the matter did not concern nursery minds and told her to leave the room. The solicitor stared at the carpet while she walked out. Cruelty arrived in small daily cuts. At supper, when roast lamb, potatoes, and buttered carrots were set before them, Adrian watched her accept a second spoon of potatoes and remarked that country habits were hard to lose. Another evening, he laughed before visitors that motherhood had made his wife soft in more ways than one. Servants carrying dishes heard every word. Eleanor kept her posture straight, answered politely when spoken to, and never let tears appear before others. She endured for Henry, Clara, and Louisa. The deepest hurt came not from scandal, but from innocence. During breakfast, with porridge cooling in bowls and rain tapping against the windows, little Henry climbed onto his father's knee and asked why father no longer kissed mother good morning. Adrian stiffened, set the child down, and said boys must learn not to ask foolish questions. He left the room without touching either of them. Henry looked confused. Eleanor turned to the window so her son would not see her face. Around that time, London gained a new favorite in Miss Seraphina Vale. She was a young widow with bright laughter, daring gowns, and a talent for making men feel grander than they were. She praised Adrian's taste, admired his horses, and listened with delight to stories others had heard too often. Soon whispers spread through clubs and tea-rooms that the Duke was seen with Miss Vale more than with his Duchess. One cold evening, Eleanor stood behind the curtain of an upstairs nursery window, candlelight warm behind her where the children played. Outside, Adrian bent with careful charm to help Seraphina into his carriage. Then he climbed in beside her and drove away. Pain changed Eleanor, but it did not weaken her mind. After the children were asleep and the house fell quiet, she began spending long evenings in the small morning room beside the library, where a coal fire burned low and only one lamp was kept lit to save oil. There she opened estate ledgers Adrian no longer bothered to read, stacks of unpaid invoices, rent reports from tenants, and letters tied with ribbon from her late father's old business circle. What first seemed disorder soon revealed something worse. Ravenshire was not merely strained, it was bleeding. There were overdue loans hidden beneath new borrowing, repairs charged twice, wine bills fit for a prince, and unexplained withdrawals made through intermediaries. Adrian's constant need to appear prosperous had become ruinously expensive. If matters continued, Henry would inherit a title with little substance behind it. Clara and Louisa might receive nothing but polished silver and portraits of dead men. Eleanor sat for a long time with one hand resting on the papers. Anger came, then fear, then a steadier feeling stronger than both. She would not let her children be sacrificed to vanity. The next week she sold a velvet case of jewels she had not worn in months. Emerald drops, a diamond brooch, and 2 bracelets passed discreetly through a trusted jeweler who knew when silence was worth more than gems. With that money, she began where her father had once taught her fortunes were truly made, in movement, goods, and timing. Through careful agents, she purchased shares in wool shipments heading north, then small positions in tea imports arriving through London docks. She placed funds into a textile mill outside Manchester, whose machines were doubling output. Later, she risked money on an engineering concern, experimenting with improved steam road carriages. Society laughed at such noisy inventions and laughed harder at the thought of a duchess meddling in trade. Eleanor never heard the laughter directly and had no need to answer it. Letters began arriving, marked with figures rather than pleasantries. She learned freight rates, harvest patterns, tariffs, and which men could be trusted only when contracts were precise. Her profits, modest at first, grew with each wise decision. While studying Ravenshire accounts, she noticed another pattern. Payments authorized by Lord Cedric Pembroke, Adrian's oldest companion and estate advisor, were oddly frequent and poorly explained. Cedric had charm enough to pass any drawing room, and manners polished enough to be believed, yet numbers betrayed him. Funds were being diverted through shell firms, land valuations were manipulated, and debts were positioned to force future sales. When she followed the trail further, another name appeared repeatedly through coded references and purchased luxuries: Miss Seraphina Vale. Cedric and Seraphina were working together. Seraphina kept Adrian dazzled and distracted, while Cedric prepared to strip Ravenshire once bankruptcy came. Eleanor moved carefully after that. She obtained copies of signatures from clerks, collected loan papers, and paid dismissed servants for truthful statements about conversations overheard. In a false drawer of a side cabinet, she found bank slips Cedric thought hidden forever. Each piece was placed in order inside a locked leather case. At home, Adrian continued speaking to her as though she were an expense rather than a person. He mocked her silence, praised Serafina's wit, and never once asked how recent bills had been settled. One rainy afternoon, Eleanor signed a fresh set of investment papers brought by courier. The returns from her ventures now exceeded Adrian's yearly personal income. She blotted the ink, folded the documents neatly, and placed them inside a locked desk beside evidence that could destroy the men who underestimated her. When invitations to the Sovereign Winter Gala were delivered across London, the city stirred with fresh excitement. It was the grandest gathering of the season, held in a palace ballroom where chandeliers blazed like captured stars, and every polished floor reflected silk, medals, and diamonds. Ministers attended, foreign guests observed, and noble families measured one another with smiles that hid sharp intentions. To arrive beside one's wife was a sign of order, honor, and strength. To appear with another woman while one's wife lived was not merely rude, it was war spoken in public. At Ravenshire House, the invitation lay beside the silver coffee service at breakfast. Toast cooled untouched. A dish of kedgeree sat between them, sending up gentle steam. Adrian unfolded his newspaper as though discussing weather rather than dignity. Without lifting his eyes, he informed Eleanor she would not be attending. He said the palace staircase was long. He said crowds no longer suited her condition. He said London could be tiring after children. Eleanor held her teacup steady, though her fingers tightened around the handle. She asked no question, because the truth was already plain. By noon, whispers had begun in drawing rooms and modistes' shops. By afternoon, gentlemen's clubs repeated it as fact. By evening, all London knew the Duke of Ravenshire intended to attend the gala with Miss Serafina Vale on his arm. Some called it boldness, most called it shameful. Even within the house, servants could not hide their distress. The housekeeper dabbed her eyes in the pantry. A maid muttered that no decent man would treat the mother of his children so. Footmen who polished Adrian's carriage lamps worked in grim silence. Eleanor shed no tear before any of them. Instead, she rose after supper and asked her maid to bring down the sapphire gown stored in cedar paper at the back of a wardrobe. It was deep blue silk, cut elegantly, last worn on an anniversary when Adrian had still looked at her with warmth. She requested the family sapphires be cleaned and laid out. Then she went upstairs to the nursery. Henry was reading by the fire, while Clara and Louisa arranged dolls on a blanket. Eleanor kissed each child slowly, breathing in the scent of soap, warm linen, and innocence. She told them to sleep well and promised to see them in the morning. Henry asked if she would be beautiful tonight. She smiled and said she would do her best. Back downstairs, 2 trusted staff members waited in the study. To one she handed sealed envelopes addressed to bankers and solicitors. To the other she gave instructions regarding a leather case of documents to be brought later. Every word was calm, precise, and free of anger. Outside, a sleek steam carriage stood ready in the courtyard, its brass fittings polished bright, its body elegant and modern. The machine had been funded by investments no one in London knew belonged to the Duchess they pitied. As its engine hissed softly in the cold night air, Eleanor stepped inside. At the gala, Adrian entered with Serafina beneath a blaze of light. She wore silver satin and confidence. Guests turned to stare, then turned away to whisper behind fans and gloved hands. Serafina accepted the attention as victory. Adrian smiled too broadly, laughing a fraction too loudly, carrying arrogance over unease like a cloak too thin for winter. Then, from beyond the ballroom, the great doors opened. Every head turned as the footmen struck their staffs and announced, "Her Grace, Duchess Eleanor Ravenshire." Every conversation in the ballroom died the moment Eleanor stepped inside. Midnight silk moved softly around her as she descended the shallow entrance steps. the Ravenshire sapphires shining against her throat with a cold blue fire. Her hair was arranged simply, which only sharpened the dignity of her face. She did not look like a woman cast aside. She looked like the rightful center of the room. Behind her came men whose presence made whispers turn urgent, 2 bankers known across the city, a respected solicitor carrying a leather case, directors from a railway concern, and finally the Dowager Duchess Beatrice, upright and stern, her expression harder than marble. The mother of Adrian had chosen her side in public, and everyone understood what that meant. Eleanor walked across the ballroom at an unhurried pace. The orchestra fell silent, one instrument at a time. Couples stepped apart to clear her path. Servants froze with trays of champagne and sugared almonds in their hands. Seraphina, who had glowed only moments earlier in silver satin, seemed suddenly overdressed and strangely small. Adrian swallowed and tried to recover his composure. He asked what she was doing there. His voice was low, but the strain in it carried farther than he knew. Eleanor stopped before him. "Ending your ruin," she replied. The solicitor opened the leather case. Papers were handed first to Adrian, then to the master of ceremonies, then to 2 gentlemen of influence standing nearby. Eleanor spoke clearly enough for those nearest to hear, and those farther away leaned in for every word. Lord Cedric Pembroke had forged accounts and diverted estate funds through false companies. Miss Seraphina Vale had purchased jewels and settled gaming debts using Adrian's name and credit. Ravenshire House, its staff and its lands would have collapsed under creditors months earlier if Eleanor's private investments had not secretly paid bills, covered wages, and preserved the family estate. Gasps broke across the hall like sudden wind. Ladies clutched fans to their lips. Men reached for spectacles. Adrian looked down at figures and signatures he recognized too late. Cedric, pale and sweating, attempted to slip through the crowd toward a side exit. 2 officers waiting near the doors stepped forward and took him by the arms before he reached the handle. His protests only fed the spectacle. Seraphina's face twisted with fury. She pointed at Adrian and cried that he had promised marriage, a title, and freedom from his dull wife. The nearest guests recoiled as though scandal itself might stain their sleeves. Those who had flattered her minutes before now turned away. Then another sound entered the silence, the quick steps of a child running. Little Henry broke from beside the Dowager Duchess and hurried to his mother. Clara and Louisa followed, clutching each other's hands. Eleanor knelt just long enough to gather them close. Then Henry looked up at Adrian with clear, wounded eyes and asked if he was done hurting Mama now. No one moved. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. Eleanor rose slowly. She removed her wedding ring, the gold warm from her hand, and placed it into Adrian's trembling palm. "You were never ashamed of me. You were ashamed that goodness made you look small." Adrian's mouth opened, but no words came. Eleanor turned, gathered her children, and walked toward the doors with calm grace. The orchestra remained frozen. London's finest watched the Duke of Ravenshire stand in the middle of splendor, with a ring in his hand, and nothing left that mattered. By sunrise, London had already decided the meaning of the previous night. Newspaper boys shouted headlines through damp streets, praising the courage and intelligence of the Duchess, who had saved a great house while being dishonored by its master. In coffee rooms and drawing rooms alike, people repeated every detail with delight sharpened by cruelty. The Duke of Ravenshire, once welcomed everywhere, became the favorite subject of mockery. Invitations quietly stopped arriving. Men who had laughed beside him crossed streets to avoid greeting him. Women who once chased his notice spoke of him with thin smiles and raised brows. Miss Seraphina Vale vanished within days, fleeing to the continent with trunks half-packed and creditors at her heels. Lord Cedric Pembroke, stripped of charm once his fraud was known, was led through court doors beneath the stare of strangers. His name, once useful in clubs and counting-houses, now opened nothing but charges. Eleanor left London without ceremony. She travelled with Henry, Clara, and Louisa to Whitmore Hall, the older country seat of her family, where broad lawns rolled into fields, and oak trees lined the drive like patient guardians. The air smelled of earth and rain rather than smoke and gossip. The children slept soundly there from their first night. Henry laughed more often. The twins ran through gardens with ribbons loose in their hair and cheeks bright from wind. Eleanor turned her mind to work with the same calm strength that had carried her through humiliation. She expanded her investments in mills, shipping, and railway shares. She reopened the village school with new books, proper coal for winter, and a teacher paid fairly enough to stay. Cottage roofs were repaired. A widow with 6 children found steady employment in the dairy. Tenant farms received seed loans after a poor harvest. Those who met the Duchess expected grandeur and found kindness joined to discipline. She became beloved by villagers and respected by men who once doubted any woman could understand trade. At Ravenshaw House, Adrian moved through silence. Rooms that had once felt ordinary now accused him by their emptiness. Fresh flowers no longer appeared in vases. No music drifted from the drawing-room. Breakfast trays arrived untouched. He wandered halls lined with portraits of stern ancestors who seemed to judge rather than honor him. In the study, he opened old letters Eleanor had written during their early marriage, full of warmth, concern, and small hopes for their future. He found ledgers in her careful hand where accounts had been corrected, debts reduced, and waste prevented years before he noticed. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence that she had loved him, while others had merely used him. Months later, on a grey afternoon thick with rain, Adrian rode alone to Whitmore Hall. There was no lacquered carriage behind him, no servants, no polished display. Mud marked his boots. Weather had touched his face before age had reason to. Pride, once his finest garment, was gone. He was shown into a bright drawing-room where sunlight broke through clouds and warmed the carpet. Eleanor stood near the window, composed and stronger than he remembered. She did not tremble. She did not rush. She simply asked what he wished to say. Whether forgiveness lived in her heart remained known only to her. For titles may open gates, command bows, and summon crowds, but once trust is broken, even a duke may stand outside forever.